The glass didn't just fall. He dropped it. It was a deliberate test of my darkness, a cold gamble to see if the woman he'd hired was truly as blind as she claimed to be. The crystal shattered against the marble floor, the sound echoing through the cavernous office like a gunshot. Silence followed, heavy, suffocating, and sharp. I stood perfectly still, my gaze fixed on the empty space in front of me. I could feel Richard's presence moving closer, his heat radiating off his tailored suit. He waved a hand inches from my face, a predatory shadow searching for the slightest flinch, the tiniest flicker of a blink. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my face remained a mask of perfect, vacant calm. "Clean it up," he said finally. His voice was smooth, like a blade wrapped in silk and twice as dangerous. I knelt, my fingers grazing the cold marble as I reached for the fragments. To him, I was just a broken tool, a witness who couldn't see, a servant who posed no threat. But as I touched a shard of crystal, I caught the distorted reflection of the room behind him. My breath hitched in my throat, though I forced my expression to stay dead. There, in the tiny shimmer of the glass, I saw the doorway. I saw the man Richard called his brother, his most trusted lieutenant, stepping into the shadows with a silenced pistol raised. I shouldn't have been able to see the betrayal. I shouldn't have been able to see the cold intent in the reflection. If Richard ever discovered I wasn't blind, he'd kill me before I had time to regret it. But if I didn't find a way to see what was happening right now, neither of us would make it out of this room alive. "Kindly." The silence that followed his words was a trap. Richard walked toward me, his footsteps heavy and deliberate on the hardwood floor. He stopped so close I could smell the faint, metallic scent of rain on his coat. I kept my eyes fixed on the middle distance, staring at a point behind his shoulder that didn't exist. To him, my gaze was empty, a hollow reflection of the world he thought I couldn't see. "The agency said you lost your sight in an accident," he murmured, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous hum. "A tragic loss for someone so young. Tell me, do you remember what color the sky is? Or have you forgotten what it's like to look a man in the eye?" The lie tasted like copper in my mouth. I'd seen the sky turn blood red the night my life was destroyed. I'd seen the face of the man who took everything from me, a man who bore a striking resemblance to the shadow currently standing in his doorway. "I remember enough to know when the sun is rising, mister," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. He reached out, his gloved fingers hovering just an inch from my cheek. I felt the heat of his hand, a silent threat that made the hair on my arms stand up. He was looking for a reaction, a tell, a sign that the woman in front of him was an imposter. But I had spent years perfecting this mask. I was a ghost inhabiting a living body. Suddenly, a sharp knock at the door broke the tension. It was his right-hand man, the same man I had seen in the reflection of the glass. He stepped into the room, his face a picture of loyal concern. "The shipment from the docks is late, boss," said, his eyes darting toward me for a split second. "We need to move now if we're going to intercept it." Richard didn't look away from me. In a moment, I was just wondering if our new guest has a sharp enough ear to match her quiet tongue. As Richard turned to grab his coat, leaned in, his shadow falling over me. He didn't say a word, but I heard the faint, distinct click of a safety being switched off on a weapon hidden beneath his blazer. He wasn't just planning a betrayal, he was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And he thought I was the only person in the room who wouldn't see it coming. Richard walked toward the door, leaving his back completely exposed. My heart hammered against my ribs. If I stayed silent, the King of Shadows would fall today. But if I spoke, I'd be signing my own death warrant. The shadows in the hallway felt alive, whispering secrets that only I was meant to hear. I moved with the practiced grace of a ghost, my cane rhythmic against the floor, tap, 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 a sound that signaled my presence and confirmed my helplessness to anyone watching. But behind the veil of my glassy eyes, I was recording the world in high definition. I was polishing the heavy oak banister when I heard the low, urgent rumble of voices coming from Richard's private study. The door was cracked just a hair, an invitation to a truth I wasn't supposed to possess. I slowed my pace, leaning into the wall as if searching for balance. "The girl is a liability, Richard," voice hissed, sharp with an edge I hadn't heard before. "A blind maid in a house full of secrets. It's sloppy. People are talking. They think you're getting soft." "People can think whatever they like," Richard replied, his voice a calm, chilling contrast to heat. "She sees nothing. She hears nothing that matters. She is the only person in this city who doesn't look at me and see a monster." There was a long pause, the kind of silence that precedes a storm. "That's the problem," snapped. "You're looking at her like she's a woman, not a servant. If the council finds out you're compromised by a stray—" "The council finds out what I tell them," Richard interrupted, his tone shifting to a lethal frost. "And you will remember your place, or I'll find someone else to fill it." I heard the heavy thud of a chair being pushed back. Panicked, I resumed my rhythmic tapping, moving away from the door just as it swung open. Stormed out, his face twisted in a snarl that vanished the moment his eyes landed on me. He stopped, looming over me like a vulture. "Careful, little bird," he whispered, leaning so close I could smell the stale tobacco on his breath. "Sometimes, the things you don't see are the ones that kill you." He shoved past me, deliberately clipping my shoulder. I stumbled, my cane clattering to the floor. I waited for the sound of his footsteps to fade before I reached down to retrieve it. But before my fingers could find the wood, a large, warm hand closed around mine. I froze. Richard was kneeling in front of me. He didn't just hand me the cane. He guided my hand to it, his touch lingering on my skin. "Did he hurt you?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "I'm fine, mister," I whispered, keeping my gaze empty. He didn't pull away. Instead, he reached up, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "You're trembling. Is it the cold? Or did you hear something you wish you hadn't?" My heart stopped. In that moment, looking into his dark, searching eyes, I realized the King of Shadows wasn't just testing my sight anymore. He was testing my soul. And just behind him, on the desk he thought I couldn't see, lay a folder with my real name on it. The folded note in Richard's pocket felt like a ticking bomb. As he stood up, the fabric of his jacket settled, hiding the evidence of Luca's betrayal. I continued to dust the nearby bookshelf, my movements rhythmic and small, playing the role of the invisible servant. But my mind was racing. Luca was the one person Richard trusted with his life, yet he was moving like a snake in the garden. "That's enough for today," Richard said, his voice regaining its usual steel. He didn't look at me as he walked toward the door, but I felt the weight of his presence linger in the room. As soon as the heavy oak door clicked shut, I dropped the ruse. I turned toward the window, watching his reflection in the glass as he walked down the hallway. Luca followed 2 steps behind him, a loyal shadow with a lethal secret. I had to know what was in that note. If Luca was working for the rival families, Richard was walking into a massacre. I waited until the sound of their footsteps faded into the marble echoes of the grand foyer. I slipped out of the room, my cane tucked under my arm, moving with a speed that would have shocked anyone in that house. I knew Richard's schedule. He had a meeting at the docks in 20 minutes. I reached his private coat closet just as the front door groaned shut. I searched the pockets of the jacket he'd left behind, the one he'd swapped for a heavier trench coat. My fingers brushed against crisp paper. I pulled it out, my heart hammering against my ribs. The note was short, written in a jagged, hurried hand. "The blind girl knows. Eliminate her tonight at the gala. I'll handle Kong." The world tilted. Luca didn't just want Richard dead. He knew my secret, or he suspected it. My breath came in short, jagged gasps as I realized the trap wasn't just for the King of Shadows. It was for me. I heard a floorboard creak behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. "Looking for something, Alina." The voice wasn't Richard's. It was Luca's. I felt the cold, unmistakable press of a silencer against the back of my head. "I always thought your eyes were a little too sharp for a girl who lives in the dark," he whispered, his grip tightening on the weapon. "It's a shame. You would have made a beautiful corpse." Just as my finger tightened around the silver knife I'd hidden in my sleeve, the closet door swung open. Richard stood there, his eyes darker than the midnight sea. He wasn't looking at Luca. He was looking directly into my eyes, really looking at me for the first time. "Drop the gun, Luca," Richard said, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "And Alina, stop pretending. I know you can see the red dot on his forehead." The thunder didn't just growl. It shook the very foundations of the Kong mansion, sounding like the heavy footfalls of a coming judgment. I moved through the darkness, my fingers skimming the cold wainscoting of the hallway. I wasn't using my cane tonight. In the strobe-like flashes of lightning, I didn't need it. I followed the low, serpentine murmur of a voice that didn't belong in the silence of the night. Luca's voice. "When he signs tomorrow's shipment papers, make it look accidental," he whispered into his phone, his shadow stretched long and distorted against the far wall. "A heart attack, a stroke, something clean. I want the throne, not a bloodbath." My stomach hardened into a knot of ice. He wasn't just a traitor, he was an executioner. He was planning to kill the man who called him brother. I should have turned back, retreated to the safety of my room and the comfort of my lie, but the pulse pounding in my ears pushed me closer. I needed to know the rest. Then, the floorboard beneath me let out a sharp, traitorous creak. The whispering stopped instantly. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the thunder. I stepped back into the shadows, my heart thundering so loudly I was sure it would give me away. I turned to flee, but I collided with something solid, warm, and immovable. A large hand shot out from the dark, catching me by the waist and pulling me flush against a broad chest. I gasped, my eyes instinctively snapping upward before I remembered to veil them. "You should be asleep, Alina," Richard said. His voice was a low vibration that traveled through my entire body. I lost my way," I murmured, my breath hitching as I felt the intense heat of his gaze searching mine. He tilted his head, the lightning illuminating the sharp, dangerous angles of his face. He looked like a fallen angel weighing the worth of a soul. "In this house, losing your way can be deadly," he warned, his voice soft but laced with a lethal edge. As he stepped past me, the wind from his movement carried a scent that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just his usual expensive cologne. It was the faint, lingering smell of Luca's stale tobacco on his lapel. They had been together recently. Too close, too intentional. Betrayal hadn't just entered the house. It had already wrapped its invisible fingers around Richard's throat. He walked toward his study, toward the papers that would end his life, completely unaware that his blind maid was the only thing standing between him and the grave. But as I watched him go, I saw something that stopped my breath. Richard didn't just walk. He paused at the door and looked back at me, his eyes narrowing in the dark. He wasn't looking at a blind girl. He was looking at a witness. Should Eliane tell HIM the truth or let the king fall? Comment, reveal, or silence below. Sleep was a ghost that refused to visit me. When the first bruised light of dawn began to bleed through the heavy velvet curtains, I found myself drawn back to the lion's den. I moved through Richard's study with a feather duster in hand, playing the part of the diligent servant, but my focus was entirely on the heavy iron safe tucked behind the mahogany cabinet. For days, I had listened to the mechanical rhythm of the lock. 3 whispered numbers had burned themselves into my memory. 198. The room was silent, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock that sounded like a countdown. My fingers, trembling slightly, found the cold silver dial. I turned it with the precision of a thief. With a soft, metallic click, the heavy door opened like a weary sigh, revealing the secrets Richard Kong kept from the world. There were no bars of gold or stacks of blood-stained cash. Instead, my eyes landed on a single, faded photograph. It was a picture of a younger Richard, standing between a man and a woman who beamed with a pride that had long since died. But it was the bundle in the woman's arms that made the world tilt. A baby girl, wrapped in white lace, looked back at the camera with wide, striking eyes that were a perfect, haunting mirror of my own. "You heard something last night, didn't you?" The voice was a whip-crack of steel in the quiet room. I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat as I shoved the safe door shut. I didn't have time to lock it. I turned, forcing my gaze to remain vacant, staring at the space where Richard's chest would be. "I asked you a question, Alina," he said, stepping out of the shadows. He looked as though he hadn't slept either. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and his hair was mussed, giving him the look of a beautiful, dangerous wreck. "No, sir," I whispered, my voice sounding thin and brittle. "I only heard the thunder." He walked toward me, his presence closing the distance until the air between us felt electric. He studied my face, his eyes searching every curve of my features as if trying to read a language he'd forgotten. The silence stretched until it was almost painful. "You're either very clever or very innocent, Alina," he said, his voice dropping to a low, rough hum. "Either way, in this house, one of those things will eventually get you killed." He reached out, his thumb grazing the corner of my eye, a gesture that felt more like a brand than a caress. Without another word, he turned and swept out of the room, leaving the door swinging in his wake. I stood frozen, my breath coming in jagged gasps. I looked back at the safe, my mind screaming with questions I couldn't ask. That baby girl wasn't just a relative. She was the missing piece of a tragedy I'd been running from my entire life. As I reached to finally lock the safe, I noticed something I'd missed. Tucked into the corner of the photograph's frame was a small, handwritten note in the same jagged script I'd seen in Luca's pocket. "She's back, Richard. And this time, she isn't leaving until the debt is paid in blood." The grand dining hall was a cathedral of glass and gold, filled with the low rumble of men who decided the fate of cities over glasses of aged brandy. I moved among them like a shadow, my movements fluid and silent as I poured amber liquid into crystal tumblers. To them, I was part of the furniture, a girl without eyes, a servant without a voice. But I was the most dangerous listener in the room. Luca was leaned against the far window, his silhouette dark against the rising moon. He was speaking in a hushed, urgent tone to a man whose face remained hidden in the gloom. "The shipment comes through the east docks at midnight," Luca said, his voice a serrated blade. "He won't see it coming. By the time the sun rises, the Kong Empire will be ours." My blood turned to liquid fire. He wasn't just planning a betrayal, he was planning a massacre. When Lucas stepped out onto the balcony to finish his call, I followed, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pressed myself against the cold stone of the archway, catching the sharp, guttural sounds of Russian tumbling from his lips. "After Kong's gone, the blind one takes the blame," Luca hissed into the phone. "She's the perfect scapegoat. Everyone knows she's useless. No one will care when she accidentally falls from the terrace." The shock hit me like a physical blow. The silver tray in my hands tilted, slipping from my numb fingers. It hit the marble floor with a deafening crash, shards of crystal spraying across the ground like diamonds. Luca spun around, his face twisting into a sneer of pure malice. He moved with the speed of a predator, closing the distance in 3 strides and seizing my wrist in a grip that felt like a vice. "Blind, huh?" he growled, pulling me so close I could see the cold, murderous spark in his eyes. "You hear that, darling? Or are you deaf as well as sightless?" I kept my gaze empty, my face a mask of frozen terror, even as my mind screamed for me to fight back. Before I could find my voice, a shadow fell over us, cold and suffocating. "Let her go, Luca." Richard's voice didn't just cut through the air, it commanded the very molecules to stop. He stood at the edge of the balcony, his hands buried deep in his pockets, his presence radiating a lethal, quiet fury. Luca's jaw clenched, his knuckles white against my skin, but he slowly loosened his grip. I stepped back, my pulse thundering in my ears, and looked toward Richard. For a split second, our gazes locked, really locked. "You keep finding trouble, Alina," Richard murmured. His eyes narrowed as if he were seeing the truth for the very first time. "Maybe trouble keeps finding me," I whispered, the lie finally beginning to crumble under the weight of the truth. Richard didn't answer, but as he looked from me to the shattered glass at my feet, his expression shifted. The mistrust was gone, replaced by a dark, terrifying realization. He wasn't looking at a helpless maid anymore. He was looking at his only ally in a house full of enemies. "If you have come this far, well done, we appreciate you. Kindly subscribe for more breathtaking Mafia boss stories. Please let us know in the comments which city or location you're watching from." The docks were shrouded in a fog so thick it felt like the breath of a dying beast. I moved through the gray haze, my cane tapping a rhythmic, deceptive warning against the damp concrete. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was swallowed by the heavy groan of the harbor and the relentless drum of the rain. My heart thudded in a frantic, mismatched tempo, every nerve ending screaming that I was walking into a trap. Through the shifting mist, I saw them. Luca's men were moving like ghosts around the parked trucks, their movements hurried and silent. But they weren't loading cargo. I watched as they carefully tucked small, black boxes beneath the vehicles, trailing thin, silver wires that snaked across the asphalt. I could smell it now, the sharp, pungent scent of gasoline and the faint, electric tang of fuses ready to spark. Then my breath hitched in my throat. Richard emerged from the fog, his long trench coat billowing behind him like a dark shroud. He was walking straight toward the trucks, his face set in a mask of grim determination, completely unaware that the ground beneath his feet was a primed graveyard. The lie died in my throat. I couldn't be a ghost anymore. "Richard!" I screamed, the sound tearing through the muffled silence of the docks. I threw my cane aside and ran, my feet flying over the wet pavement with a grace I should never have possessed. Richard turned, his eyes widening in shock as he saw me sprinting toward him. At that exact moment, the world turned into a blinding, searing white. The explosion bloomed behind me like a monstrous, fiery flower, splitting the midnight sky in two. The shockwave tossed me forward, but before I could hit the ground, Richard's powerful arms wrapped around me, pulling me down into the cold, wet shadows of a shipping container. Bullets began to whistle past us, pinging off the metal like lethal hail. "How did you?" he started, his voice a ragged growl as he shielded my body with his own. He looked down at me, his face illuminated by the dancing orange flames, searching for the empty gaze he had come to expect. "I saw it," I gasped, my lungs burning from the heat and the smoke. The fuses, the wires, I saw all of it. The truth finally untangled itself between us in the wreckage of the docks. The illusion I had spent years perfecting was blown wide open, shattered as completely as the trucks behind us. Richard stared at me, his dark eyes searching mine with a terrifying intensity, as if he were seeing the real Alina for the very first time. There was no going back. The blind maid was dead, and the witness had finally emerged from the shadows. But as the smoke filled my lungs and the world began to tilt, my vision blurred into a sea of gray. "Alina, stay with me." Richard's voice was the last thing I heard before everything went black, leaving me at the mercy of a man who now knew my greatest secret. When I woke, the world smelled of smoke and rain. Faint light spilled through the broken windows, painting Richard's study in shades of gray and ruin. He sat across the room, leaning against the wall, a shadow too still to be safe. His gun was on the table beside him, untouched. His eyes, those cold, storm-colored eyes, found me. "How long?" he asked, voice rough from silence. "How long have you been lying to me?" The question trembled in the air like a blade. I pressed my palms into the sheets, finding my breath. "Since the beginning," I whispered. "If I hadn't, I'd be dead." He stood slowly, every movement precise, dangerous, like a lion packing before a kill. "You made a fool of me." I shook my head. I was hiding from something worse, the same people who killed your family. He froze. In his eyes I saw something flicker, shock, denial, and the quiet ache of an old wound reopening. From the pocket of my uniform, I drew the photograph I found in his safe, his parents, smiling, a child between them. My fingers trembled. I was told I was her, the girl in this picture, the one they took away. For a moment, silence filled the mansion, deep enough to drown in. He took the photo, staring at it as if time itself had turned cruel. Then gunfire. The windows shattered. Bullets carved through the dark, snapping the spell between us. Richard grabbed me, pulling me behind the overturned desk, his arm curled protectively around my shoulders. I could feel his heartbeat against my back, steady, fierce, alive. When the last echo faded, his voice brushed my ear. "They found us." Our eyes met in the smoke. For the first time, his anger was gone. In its place, something raw, uncertain. "You shouldn't have come into my world," he said quietly. Maybe I already belonged here, I said. He hesitated, then reached up, brushing glass from my hair, his fingers lingering just a moment too long. Then we finish this together, he murmured. The storm outside roared, but inside that broken mansion, something else began to stir, fragile, dangerous, and beautifully alive. The tunnel below the mansion was wet with rainwater and the scent of iron. Emergency lights pulsed in crimson, bathing Richard's face in shades of fire and shadow. Our footsteps splashed softly, the world above fatting behind us. Neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't fear anymore, it was thick with something unspoken. Every brush of his shoulder against mine made my pulse skid. At the final turn, he stopped. "Luke is dead," he said flatly, voice hollow, "but they'll keep coming." "Then stop running," I whispered. He turned to me, eyes burning through the haze. "You think I can just walk away, after everything I've done?" I stepped closer until our breaths mingled in the space between us. "I think the man who saved me isn't beyond saving himself." He stared at me far too long, like he was memorizing every lie, every truth hidden in my eyes. His hand lifted slowly, almost not touching my face, just tracing the air between us. That ghost of a touch felt more dangerous than any bullet. "I don't know what this is," he said softly, "but it scares the hell out of me." "Then we're both afraid," I breathed. The sound of sirens drifted faintly through the tunnel. Police, or worse, time was slipping. He stepped closer, closing the last inch between us. His fingers caught my chin, gentle despite the violence trembling around us. "I should send you away," he said, voice husky, "but I can't." I swallowed hard. "Then don't." Something in him broke. His forehead rested against mine, both of us standing still while the world above collapsed. When his lips brushed mine, it wasn't anger or possession, it was surrender. The kiss was trembling fire, short, stolen, filled with everything we couldn't say. When he finally pulled back, his hand lingered at my throat, thumb tracing the edge of my jaw as if unsure it was real. Above us, thunder rumbled again, calling the storm back. "This isn't the end, Alina," he said, breathless. "It's only the beginning." I nodded, heart racing. "Then let it begin." Outside, the red lights flickered out, plunging us into darkness, but his hand stayed in mine. Two souls born in secrets, standing on the edge of war, bound by something neither could name. And as the first echoes of approaching boots filled the tunnel, I knew one truth. Whatever came next would burn the world we knew. To be continued. Tell me in the comments, should Richard protect her at any cost, or should Alina save them both by walking away?